Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Play, Watch, Listen. I'm Alanah Pearce. I'm joined by Austin Wintory and Mike Bithell. Troy was not able to join us today, devastatingly. This is our first official After Dark episode, whatever that means. But we did want to mention from the jump that going forward, as people's schedules maybe start to ramp back up a little bit, this may happen from time to time. So we'll obviously just, from the top of the show, keep you posted on what's going to happen. We're open to the idea of potentially having other people jump in. But in general, the ideal format for this show is, of course, the four of us talking about video games. So that's not going to change. Just, Troy's busy being a dad.
Talking about video games, and in this week's case, talking a lot about Troy.
Yes.
We will
a lot.
We will get
all
grievances
are going to get aired.
Exactly.
Yeah, we'll get it all out of the air.
It'll be a full Festivus.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
It's like he was here all along. He's just looking at you.
Shall I be in his living room?
Yeah, I was like, I should have asked him for that file.
There's something about that angle that kind of looks like it was taken from the perspective of a wall, like a urinal cam.
There we go. It's my Troy background.
He's got this. I'm very
Such
occupied.
A good background. For our audio listeners, we are changing our backgrounds to things that relate to Troy Baker.
I didn't even see you do it, Mike. That's hilarious.
It works really well.
I know, it's very
really
convincing.
Does. Yeah. I've got alternate views as well because I've just had too many video calls with Troy recently. So let me just what can I do? I can move over.
How'd you get that shot of Troy on the horse, Alanah? That's particularly impressive.
In all video games, I feel like all the time I play something and I'm like, is that fucking Troy again? And it is all the time. It's so weird. Very nice. Angle 2. Good job.
Angle 2.
It's so good at editing. Zoom's impressive stuff.
Now's the moment where you reach and you pull on your book of a coffee table book of the Troy
photos.
House tour. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I do. I've got to have something with a Troy character on the cover. He is 50% of video games.
Surely.
Isn't he?
I just started replaying Spec Ops The Line and I was like, no, Nolan? Yeah, it's fucking Nolan. Definitely gets to a point where when you're friends with people and you hear their voices in video games, you're like, oh, all right, Nolan, okay.
I'll give to Troy's credit though, and it's a lot easier to compliment him when he's not here. There have been many times where it was the opposite, where I was like, wow, this is an interesting voice, and then I was like, god damn, it's him again.
Yeah.
Where he really chameleonically transforms in a way that it's hard for me to hear, because sometimes even if it's dressed up into a character, like Hex is a great example. That's not remotely Troy's speaking voice, but I could hear the Troy in the core of it. Like I can hear, maybe I just know his voice so well at this point from how many of these and phone calls and hanging out and then just playing all the games. There's, you kind of learn that imprint, but there's still every now and again, I'm like, hot damn, that's
I don't feel like he sounds like Joel very much really at all. Like I
still can't put those two things together. I can't, like Troy in most other roles I hear as Troy, but like Joel in Last of Us, it's
very convenient for someone who wants to be very immersed in that universe, that I'm not like Troy Baker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's the story of Troy and Ellie.
You shouldn't have to choose your friendships based on which games those friendships will mess up for you in future. Right? You should
definitely
be able to be friends with anyone.
Mostly when I find Troy in something, it's a cool Easter egg. I'm like, oh, it's again? What the hell, man? Like he just does everything. Always very good. Always very good. Great hair. We're all devastated that his hair is not present.
I'm interested, what are the comments going to be about on this episode without Troy here to provide...
Everyone's hair sucks.
So much hair.
But speaking of Troy Baker, known PlayStation exclusive, we wanted to talk a little bit about Ghost of Tsushima. Did you guys end up watching the State of Play?
I loved it, yeah.
I did also, yeah. Here, I'll just get it out of the way because I suspect Mike will have a far more interesting analysis. But actually, well, between the two of you, you'll be looking at it through those
Don't get your hopes up, Austin, is all I'm saying.
Well, I first off, I had no idea. I didn't catch from Twitter, for example, from people talking about it. Actually, surprisingly, not a lot of chatter, although I haven't been checking social media as much lately, deliberately.
Fair.
But the sort of like classic cinema black and white ultra windy mode, I thought was such a cool touch.
So
it's
cool.
like what a love letter.
Seven Samurai mode.
Yeah,
right?
this
Yeah.
like
It's just-
Yojimbo mode, you know? Like I thought that was such a beautiful. I thought it's funny because the game was strikingly beautiful, and I thought I would be so tempted to play the whole game in that black and white mode, but they also make clear just what you'd be missing in the process, which is an interesting dilemma because I thought, man,
But then
that-
because it's also raining the whole time, and I think it adds like some different dramatic effects. Maybe it's not raining the whole time, but most of the time, like that Kurosawa mode, as I'm calling it,
Right.
adds a lot of atmosphere that I feel like I'll jump between the two a lot. Because right now in my head, when I think of Ghost of Tsushima, I think of bright red leaves. Like that's what my head goes to because of probably some of the early footage that we saw. But having that mode, I just want every game to have it now. Like Animal Crossing, hell yeah, sign me up. That'll be great. It's so pretty. But okay, before we get to the question I wanted to ask that was related to that, Mike, what did you think of it?
I was hyped. I think I said like on the last episode that like I didn't know what the game was yet, and I wanted them to just literally like show me the map screen, show me navigating to a point, show me in a fight, show me, and it just did all of that. No, it looks amazing. It looks like I still maintain that like I feel like Horizon Zero Dawn was basically them trying to make like the Sony in-house Far Cry. And this feels like very much the Sony in-house Assassin's Creed in the best possible way.
Yeah.
Lots of Tenshu in there,
totally
and a
agree
big
with
stealth
that.
guy. So like I looked at it and yeah, it's one of those things where you look at it and instantly like send it on to your 5 mates who don't really follow game news.
Yeah,
Because
for
you're
sure.
like, this is going to be one of the ones that you're going to want to check out.
I'm really excited about this game. One thing that I wanted to mention that I didn't notice the first time that I watched through the state of play that I feel like most people just haven't noticed is Ghost swaps the bow at some point in combat. So there is an animation that people were saying, why does this look so brutal? Like it looks like he's just shot someone. It is because he changed bow types. I just feel like a lot of people missed that. So
Right.
pay attention to the fact that the bow type changes and thus the animation changes accordingly.
Very reliable on those minutia.
I just try to speak for the people. That's what I'm really about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shining a light.
So what I wanted to
Shining
get
a light.
into today that I'm just going to spring on you guys is this is an example that mode that you brought up, Austin, which really screwed
And
up
the-
my whole segue because I was
and
gonna,
Well, and I just got to tack on to that also in the similar vein, the notion of defaulting. They don't actually default, they say, but they kind of presented it a little bit like they would, defaulting to the game being in Japanese with subtitles. Also, it's like watching anime. The dubbed version, again, with all due respect to Troy, who I know earns at least some portion of his living participating in the redubbing of things like anime. To me, it's so out of the character of it. And this seemed like, even though, obviously there's an enormous number of Americans and whatnot who work on the game, like it felt like to play it in Japanese, the fact that they acknowledge that up front, that you playing it with subtitles is almost like kind of the sort of secret main way to play. I loved that. That to me felt very related to the
they were
the,
very
Kurosawa.
careful about voice actors for this game. I know that. I know that Sucker Punch was really cautious about not being racially insensitive because they did get a little bit of criticism. I think for maybe it was Second Son, just for some of the themes in that game particularly. So they were really careful. And I believe, if I remember being told at E3, there's someone at Sucker Punch who's voiced a character in every single game that they've had. It's just a running thing that he's just voiced someone in every game, just kind of for fun, I guess. And I think that in this game they couldn't find a spot for him because they were like, it just doesn't work. We can't have you doing an accent. It's just wrong. So they were really, really careful about that stuff. But Austin, does that does that mean you're a dub v sub person? You prefer subtitles from the jump?
If it's if it's basically anything not natively in English, I would prefer it be in its original language, because to me, the disconnect, if nothing else, the disconnect between the performance of an overdub versus, especially if you're talking about a live action film, that to me, it's just unwatchable. It's so distracting. Even if the performance is independently good, it's just not the one that's also physically happening. Because it was mind-blowing to me talking with, so much of the rest of the world is used to watching American films dubbed into their language, that's like the default norm. And that blew my mind because I was like, I would never watch a French film dubbed in English or a Japanese film dubbed in English or whatever. To me, and it's not, I'm not trying to be snobbish or something. It just,
you can have
it's
preference.
just distracting. It to me. So yeah, I thought it was really cool that this seemed to be kind of built. He didn't overtly say the game will default to being in Japanese. In fact, he seemed to directly say the opposite. But the fact that they called that out in their highlights, and if they have less than 20 minutes to point out some top level things to attract you, the fact that would be something they call out was, I thought, very cool. And I thought that I would be inclined. I've never once changed the settings on a game in that way before.
I did for Final Fantasy, and Sekiro is entirely in Japanese, which works really well for it. So with games, like I get it.
Played Sekiro.
It's so good.
I know. It's just
it is.
You don't really play Sekiro. Sekiro plays you.
Did you find that on Reddit? Is that a meme?
That's quite good. Like, yeah, it's definitely a Reddit meme.
Very good.
Apologies.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on live action, but when it comes to anything animated, I generally care so much about looking at the art, and I have trouble not reading. So like I don't want to read subtitles. I just do all the time, and it's very difficult for me to look at everything else. So for a Ghibli film, for example, I'm going to watch the dub instead of the sub of that, because I would way prefer to be watching the art the whole time than reading subtitles.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's funny. Maybe I
think yours is probably the more popular take. Like, I think that I'm the filthy peasant for being like, sometimes I prefer a dub, but it's also if the dub's bad.
I mean, that's a very good justification, though. That's a very good reason, because the artistry is astounding, and every millimeter of the frame is usually like very beautifully and carefully. I think I kind of spot check the subtitles really rapidly. It's funny. My Instagram for some reason is always full of memes from The Office. It's like I clicked on one once, and now it's just like, this is all you like. And admittedly, that's
puppies,
not wrong.
A lot of puppies.
But yeah, good amount. But there's an episode where Jan gets like breast implants and comes in with this shirt that's like super cleavagey, and so you see her standing there like, trying to have a conversation, and all the guys are just sort of staring at her, and it was like, the meme text was like, like the subtitles versus the show of like, you just can't look away.
Yep.
And I remember saying like, that's like that I did have to kind of train myself to spot check, and then because we were watching recently rewatched Akira.
Great film. And
I hadn't seen it. In fact, I may have never actually seen it entirely. It was like I'd seen fragments of it over the years and convinced myself I had watched it. Because there were lots of it that I was like, that's super bizarre, and I don't think I ever have seen this before.
Oh, Akira is weird as hell.
It's great.
It really
I loved it, but it's one of those where I was definitely conscientiously kind of making sure I didn't miss anything relevant, but then keeping eyes away from the subtitles. But I just couldn't bear it in English. But anyway, I've derailed you thoroughly.
No, this still actually kind of works. What was the I had an idea for how I could segue Akira
like
into
segues deep at this
the topic.
point.
Basically,
like
what I wanted to talk about was Ghost of Tsushima has like a Kurosawa mode. And I think they've been pretty blatant about what that's inspired by. And then, I recently just watched through all of the Clone Wars. And then after finishing the Clone Wars, ended up watching a lot of Star Wars reference. Watching a lot of interviews about the Clone Wars where Dave Filoni and George Lucas are like, well, this is our Seventh Samurai episode. Same thing they do in Mandalorian. This is our Godzilla episode. And the Godzilla episode in Clone Wars is so obvious that it's Godzilla that they're parodying. It's like, what do you guys think of the biggest collection of those beats that are constantly remade throughout media? And do you think that there is going to be a point where video game beats become something else? Like, is there a world where the Bioshock moment of a man chooses, a slave obeys, and figuring out what all of that means becomes in other platforms? Or do you think that we're too far removed that video games ever get kind of repeatedly reworked by anything other than other video games? Because I know like Ocarina of Time is still just remade all the time, referenced all the time. I've probably said it on this show before, but one of my favorite GDC talks was the Platinum team talking about how they basically made that game, Nier Automata feel good. And part of what they did for deciding the map size was very much like, well, what's a good map size? Ocarina of Time. So they just made it the same as Ocarina of Time. And I love the idea of doing that I've definitely spoken about this before. Everything being Ocarina of Time is still absolutely an influence that we have. But when do we start having our own Kurosawa mode where...
Which goes outwards.
Yeah.
You mean like, it escapes just internal games,
or is it not
referencing
capable
other
of that?
games?
I think there's an argument that in part it's already happening. I think there's
I can only think of one.
I can think of two, so I'll try those. So first off, definitely John Wick has boss fights, and that was something we definitely, having worked on John Wick, we talked about a lot, both internally and also with the film guys of like
when they were filming, they conceived of.
There's a video game logic to it, so
even the
Chad
kind
plays...
of board that they have in John Wick is video gamey.
Yeah, like there's definitely like Chad's not a gamer, but he respects and likes games, and I think there's definitely a bit of kind of influence going into there, and I think you can look at John Wick and go, this is a video game movie, and that was definitely something. But actually, kind of taking away from the stuff I've directly kind of got awareness of is something like, say, Game of Thrones opening with the map screen. That, as admittedly, is also owes a great debt to old fantasy books always having the map on the first page, of course. But I think for a modern audience, that's that understanding of a spatial relationship and that introduction being very video gamey in the way it steers you around. I don't think that's a massive stretch. I think there is that literacy of space and geography. The average kid now can probably read a map better than I could when I was a kid, because they were looking at the map screens in these games all the time and kind of getting a sense of how this all works.
That's true. Yeah.
So that it's a stretch. Admittedly, it's a bit of a stretch. It's a bit of a hot take, but yeah. What's yours, Austin?
I actually think you'll probably completely agree with mine. Because I don't think it's I don't think it's a stretch, because here's my preview, my setup, was I remember when the star of this film went on the Daily Show at the time to promote it. The first thing out of Jon Stewart's mouth was, this movie is basically the best adaptation of a game I've ever seen without it being an adaptation of a game, which was Tom Cruise on The Edge of Tomorrow.
True.
And the time cycle was like a respawn point or a save point mechanic. And everybody who watched it seemed to have this takeaway of, it felt very much like a game of iterate, like a roguelite or roguelike almost, where of iterating past a save point and respawning and reiterating and refining your skills. Everyone who saw that movie, which was criminally few people apparently, because I think that movie is like one of the best modern sci-fis.
Super fun.
And
it's based on a manga, right? As well, like I think that's the connective tissue to games.
It could be. Now that you say that, I think you're right. It does jog a memory that I feel like I knew that at one point and forgot. But yeah, point is that one was one where it had a very gamey kind of mechanic built into its premise, that even though it has no direct tie to a game franchise, it's not a movie adaptation of, live, die, repeat the game. It is something that people seem to intuitively understand without needing some big talky sci-fi, well, the chronometers have had their polarity reversed sort of thing in order to justify it. It was like, this is just a thing that happens in the way that a lot of games just present in that manner.
That's always my response to people who ask, like, when are video games going to be considered art? And it's basically throughout history, every new entertainment medium has become art the second all the people who didn't grow up with it died. And that's, I mean, like, in a really blunt way, like, that's when film was accepted, that's when television was accepted. Like, if you were born into a world with it, you consider it to be art and media in exactly the same way. Right. I think that's true of the film industry now towards games. Like, it's really interesting walking into those kind of studios, and you've done film work as well, Austin, so you've overlapped with those guys, but like, they know games. That first meeting with Lionsgate was, we want to make GoldenEye.
But only in the last few years.
Right, because people have aged into those positions of power, and I think it's the same is true of film directors. You mentioned that movie. I think of Source Code from Duncan Jones, which is a similar kind of groundhog day. And of course, he's a major gamer, and he's a mega nerd, ultra nerd, and actually worked in games for a bit before he made Moon. I think he was a level designer, I want to say, but anyway, he did some stuff. And I think that overlap now is becoming just kind of part of the kind of the reality of it. And I think that's how you have influence is you basically just have to influence enough people during their childhood that they take it forward.
All You Need Is Kill is the name of the manga that I guess inspired.
All You Need Is Kill.
Yeah, that's right. That sounds.
How old is that? Is that something?
How old is it?
Because
2014. So not that old. It's
yeah,
really
I feel like
run,
that's
actually. It's only two volumes. I might read that,
2014 is.
It's not a big commitment, is it? 2 volumes.
No, I love a 2-volume manga. Are you kidding?
That's also like when you find out that an open world game is 15 hours long.
That.
You're like, yeah, I could do that.
Wasn't the film like 2015 or 2016? Like, that's a shockingly fast turnaround for a pretty big film adaptation.
Well, this
happens. This happens a fair amount now in Hollywood, where they will have these projects that originate basically where the comic book is the pitch for the movie. And you see that. I think that was done with the Noah movie. You remember the Russell Crowe Noah movie?
The Aronofsky.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that was a graphic novel.
That was Aronofsky.
That's Aronofsky.
Isn't that strange?
I admire anyone who looks at the Bible and goes, needs a rewrite. Let's get it done. Like that's a level of like hubris that I admire.
No way. I had no idea.
And then Oblivion, the another Tom Cruise movie, I think was also similarly kind of originated. I think it's often like it's a good stepping stone basically to producing a visual identity of something and kind of showing imagery to the execs and going, this is rather than a script, this is the world we're creating.
Right.
To jump back to what you were saying before, Mike, about things become art as soon as the population ages out. I just this morning did a panel basically on games and brands and marketing and how all of that is developing. And one of the questions in the Q&A segment we got was about why games still aren't taken seriously, being, the highest grossing entertainment industry in the entire world. And the only answer I can think of is, okay, boomer. Like it is.
Who are they not taken seriously by? That's my response nowadays.
I would say maybe it's mainstream media. Like it really is the older generation. It is as you said, people who didn't grow up with video games who aren't recognizing the validity of video games. And I do wonder sometimes if some of that is that video games are still so iterative of other things. And you're right, that the people who grow up now playing video games might even, like, I think we will see a loop of things that are now in film that are inspired by video games. Obviously, Ready Player One's an amazing example. Austin.
I think it's looped back.
Yeah.
I think also, because I think about this a lot in like that question of, what separates the kind of cultural impact of games versus film when film is still held broadly on this pedestal. And I think the reason why is because while games make more money, they make more money from a smaller population, because the film is so much more pervasive. Like a billion people will watch a Marvel film. And a billion people have never played any one game, period, except maybe like the Mario franchise in aggregate over the last 30 years.
Or the top 10 mobile games right now.
Yeah, that's a weird one to think about, is how big that market is and how little I consume it at all.
Yeah, and how we don't take it seriously. And when we think about video games, Austin's right. Like when you're saying video games are not taken seriously, you don't mean mobile games. Because you know that everyone in the mainstream is playing those. You mean specifically the niche of kind of console and PC.
Yeah. But even mobile games, I think the ones that are the most successful, even you think of like a 10-cent game like Honor of Kings. It's like hundreds of millions of players, and they'll do big orchestra recordings that Abbey Road for their scores, and hire guys like Hans Zimmer. Like they spare no expense on those, but they're also a little bit flash in the pan. They'll make 50 games, one of them hits, and that's the one that they sort of ride as long as they can. And then maybe it has a shelf life of, a month, 2 months, a year, and then people get excited about whatever XYZ new game, and then they put all their energy into that. It's in a way, and I don't mean this to diminish it, but it's like McDonald's. McDonald's has served billions of burgers. Like arguably they have fed more people than almost any entity on the planet. But it's the same that if you're talking about like your greatest food experiences of your life, people are not typically going to go to that as their
I disagree.
as their go-to.
Have you ever been really hungover and had some McNuggets?
Oh my goodness.
Incredible
The
experience.
fries. The fries. Like just the largest. I'll have 2 of your largest portions of fries, please.
Oh, beautiful.
I am a weird.
The angels sing.
I'm a McDonald's breakfast apologist. I don't give a shit what
Egg
you come at me
McMuffin,
with.
Man.
That's the thing.
Bacon and egg
I'm
McMuffin. You buy 2 hash browns on the side. You open it up. You put the hash brown in. You close it. So good.
For not being American, you sound awfully American.
It's true. I love a hash brown though. How did we get
so
here?
Funny.
The McDonald's of video games.
Yes, the Ghost of Tsushima is a direct line to McDonald's breakfast. No, but it's true. So I think that the number of people that see a film. I remember one of the first GDC memories I have. I think it was Clint Hawking or somebody who was giving like a design rant or something at GDC 12, 13, 14 years ago. And they made this point, and it still holds true today, even with the continued expansion of the game industry. Just simply more people will see the average hit film.
Yeah.
Especially because of the tail where there's still the remains of the old distribution model where you'd have a primary market in theaters and then a secondary market of maybe 10 years or 15 or in some cases eternity on cable TV and blah, 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 where the continued resurfacing. I mean, how many movies, or how often rather is a better way to phrase it, how often do you, like, which movie for you is if you're flipping randomly through a TV, even if it's like in a hotel and you hit upon fill in the blank film, that you're like, I know what I'm doing now for the next hour. I have to see this through to the end. It's just one of those movies. I think everybody has a film that's true for, right? Alanah, you may not, because you're like, I don't watch movies. What is a movie?
I mean, I have movies that in certain moods I want to watch, but they're like generally just if I'm bummed out, I just really love that first Scooby-Doo live action movie is so good.
That's awesome.
The James Gunn one.
Hilarious.
I just love that movie. Otherwise I just try to watch. Yeah.
He wrote it, yeah.
Oh, he wrote it?
Yeah.
He didn't direct it?
I don't
know.
think
Did he direct it as well?
Like the Sarah Michelle Gellar Scooby-Doo? That's so funny.
He may have directed it. But no, because I've seen so few films, I just always want to watch new stuff. I'm really still catching up here. I think he maybe just wrote the screenplay. But
it's like when you find out Joss Whedon wrote Alien Resurrection, you're like, oh, that's Firefly. That's just Firefly with an alien.
Yeah.
Oh,
but he also wrote Toy Story.
Joss Whedon wrote Toy Story.
Yeah, he got Oscar nominated. He's one of several credited writers, to be fair, but he is an Oscar nominee on account of the screenplay to Toy Story. He's got a few random, like, I think he also wrote Titan AE.
Now that's a movie.
No way.
Yes, exactly.
That's a great movie. I genuinely love.
Really? I
unironically
remember
love
seeing it in the
Titan
theater
AE.
and being like, I want to love this, and I just somehow couldn't. But maybe it was going past me.
Don Bluth, space horse-faced bad guy. Oh, it's perfect.
I don't know
it's
what's
just
happening.
Perfect.
Completely lost me. I'm doing my best over here. I was gonna say my contribution to a list of movies that I feel are very video game like would be Kubo and the Two Strings. Have either of you guys seen that?
It's been on my list since I saw the first.
My girlfriend works in the
poster.
studio, so I've
No
seen all
way.
the puppets and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have mentioned that before. I love that studio. They make amazing
I've mentioned
stuff.
it as much as I can. It's one of the things I'm very proud of.
It's one of your best assets. My girlfriend.
One of my
works at that
greatest
studio.
achievements is my girlfriend's career. Yeah, no, absolutely.
That movie specifically, I remember seeing it in theaters and thinking the structure of this is so video gamey, and then it really feels like there are levels, and then occasionally you'll see the main character walk into a large open room, and you'll be like, "This seems like a boss fight," and then the boss comes in, and there's a boss fight, and it just in a way that I don't know why I get this feeling, but I had a weird pride for it. I'm like, oh, cool. You definitely like video games, and I feel like that fed into that film, and like maybe we'll see more of that level design structure, because I'm a massive sucker for level design. Generally, the difference between me loving a game and not loving a game is usually going to be the level design. Like that's just the thing that I tend to pay the most attention to or remember really distinctly. It's just something that I like very intensely care about. Like I'll rant about Dishonored 2 until the day I'm dead because the level design in that game, god damn, so good. So when you see a film that has something like level design that feels like it's structured in that way, it feels like it's video gamey, I still don't know if that's just iterative of film doing that in the first place with the DP, or if that is something that video games iterated on in an effective way. Like I just don't know
But it's
when
fashion,
this full circle
like
comes
as
around.
well, right? Like geography of fight scenes is such a thing now that I feel like a lot of, I guess, possibly bring it back because of John Wick and movies like it that just kind of pulled that camera back and gave you a real sense of the location.
Oh,
I wonder if those filmmakers are looking at how video games stage combat, which is all about like the player being aware of exactly what's going on and who's around them and all that stuff, and is actively kind of putting that in. So maybe I think that's cool, and you see it even more. Like, what's the Ryan Reynolds NPC comedy that's coming up? I remember seeing a trailer for that. Is it called NPC or something?
That I have a similar. It's like blurry. I remember going,
where it's Ryan Reynolds plays an
It might be
NPC
called
in an
NPC,
open world
yeah.
game. Yeah, and he realizes he's a character in a video game, and hilarity presumably ensues. Sounded like I doubted that. I do doubt that. But that kind of thing, like, yeah, there's definitely the movie makers are assuming the audience is video game literate, which is cool. Which is great.
Well, there have been examples of them trying to do that I feel like failed, like Pac-Man movie, I think was a thing. And then there's that movie Pixels, which seemed to just very much focus on the meme culture of video game literacy, and I don't think it did particularly well. So I feel like there's still very much a series of older execs who recognize the engagement that video games are getting online, or recognize how popular streaming has become, or they see the sales numbers for GTA and they say, we need to tap into that, but they still have absolutely no idea how to do it. And that is really an age thing. Where
I remember Wreck-It Ralph being quite good.
Yeah, Wreck-It Ralph was really good, actually.
But the thing is what makes Wreck-It Ralph good is that the video game elements to it are kind of secondary to it as a character piece.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the heart and soul of what makes... I mean, truthfully, any narrative experience that's why you will end up caring about it. You know, like look at in the game side of it, our missing comrade here, The Last of Us solely works on the back of its profoundly impactful narrative. You know, you don't. I mean, I say this with all respect to everyone at Naughty Dog from the bottom to the top. Like, that's not a game that I see anybody raving about mechanically. Or like gameplay or level design. It has a lot. I actually loved the environmental storytelling of that game. I remember I loved exploring and finding all the traces where you walk into a room and there's like, you know, a hand blood trail leading into a closet or whatever, you know, to create the sense of like, this is a space that has undergone a horrific event and I'm bearing witness to it as like the dust has settled, and all of that element to it was fantastic. But the reason people loved it, the reason people are excited about the sequel, the reason people are excited about the HBO show is because it tells a compelling story really well. And the crazy thing is so many games, like Pac-Man is a great example. Like the mechanics are just so beautifully tuned that it just yields infinite billions of hours of enjoyable gameplay. Oh, how the hell you turn that into a film that doesn't feel like it's just pointing and laughing at it? I don't know. I just don't know the answer there. It's probably not possible. A mechanics-driven game, I'm not sure could ever really work. I feel like we've been here before. I'm having a deja vu play, watch, listen.
I had
moment.
a thing where I was going to bring up Quantum Break and be like, have you guys played that game? I feel like we've spoken about that. We're almost 15 episodes in. Or is this episode 15? I think it might be. And at a certain point, you just go, I don't know anymore. But like that's an example of Quantum Break being a game where actually really good gameplay. I really enjoyed the gameplay in that game. But then had the TV segments basically after each chapter that were live action. And I personally liked it. I liked the way that I was able to play that. I liked playing through, watching my TV episode, and then ending my play session with that. It was like I had unlocked a reward that I got to just passively consume. Maybe it was because I was playing that game on hard. I don't know. That it was like a chill thing to have happen. And I liked that crossover. And I know there's that sci-fi TV series that was supposed to respond to what you did in game.
Was that Defiance?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that the one? Yeah, I remember that. I remember working like I was working in a pitch team at a game studio when that came out, and everyone was like, "This could be the future, guys. We need to be ready for this to be how all video games."
It sort of fizzled, didn't it?
Basically, yeah. It was like it was an MMO. I think the TV show, from what I've heard, the TV show was actually okay, but like the MMO was kind of not great.
Yeah.
In a time where there was so many MMOs, right? When everyone was chasing that World of Warcraft.
I just wonder how far off we are from that partnership existing more prominently as well, because I know there are a lot of studios who really do care about multimedia and about being on as many platforms as possible. I mean, EA does it a lot and is also just very good at it. About, they have Battlefront 2, and at the same time they have a book about Iden Versio and the Inferno Squad. And then that's potentially going to be referenced in Mandalorian. And that's like really because you have the Star Wars universe, but also EA were the ones who pushed to get that book out to like make sure that happened. And that's the thing that, all of this content that you can surround that universe with is how far off are we of actually having the relationship between a video game series and a movie not feel like, again, some exec in a room being like, let's make money off them gamers, and actually feel like a mutually like respected, beneficial relationship, considering how high the player base is? Or is that not just possible because, to Austin's point, there are so many more film goers than there are people playing any one individual game?
I guess the closest I can think of a time where I've seen it done and considered it successful was the Matrix. What was the Matrix game called? Where they like you go, although you go back now and watch Reloaded and Revolutions, which I wouldn't recommend. And like there are massive gaps, and I have to remind myself, that was in the game. That's why I remember things happening in those movies. What was the name of the game?
I never played it.
Matrix.
Yeah,
I know the one you're talking about, but I never played it either, and I can't.
And that one literally had like the Wachowskis shot new footage for it. There were scenes. There's also, the Niobe character who's like
pulling
main
up. I'm on Google. I keep pulling up. I meant to go game. Internet Explorer. People are going to roast me for using Internet Explorer. I just want you to know that the reason I'm using Internet Explorer to search for Matrix video game rather than another browser that is better is just because this way there's no search history and I'm not logged into anything. Is it Enter the Matrix?
That's the one.
Enter the Matrix.
Yeah,
the plot running
game.
Alongside that of the first two films, with full motion clips filmed at the same time as Reloaded, revealing extra parts of the story. No way. I did not know that.
So the character you played was Niobe, who's in the movies, played by Jada Pinkett Smith, I think.
Right, yeah.
So that's the character that's the character you're playing in the game. So you're kind of she ducks in and out of the movies a lot, and those are where you're going and playing the level. So as like the exact right age to be obsessed with the Matrix, like during its theatrical run and the Animatrix and Enter the Matrix and all that stuff. Like, for me, that was amazing. So I was like, I know more than everyone around me. But it does play into the Austin point of, like, the movies couldn't assume that you hadn't played the game because most people wouldn't have done. And
Plus,
that's the biggest challenge.
As also the creative process is so different. Like, going back to that, the transmedia thing, the sci-fi Defiance.
Yes.
Defiance, yeah.
Like, the thing that is so intrinsically impossible about that is that the lead time to create a season of television versus the continuous unrolling of MMO. Like, just even look, here's my pivot. So Bear McCreary did the music for Defiance, but he also did the music on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And look at their struggle to just keep pace with the rest of the MCU. Like, they just full on gave up at some point because they even said publicly, their big season finale timed precisely with the finale of Infinity War, and the two just don't overlap. In fact, so much so that you're like, shouldn't they be aware of this global catastrophe going on just down the road? And the ABC execs and the Marvel TV folks were like, basically our shifting production schedule and their shifting production schedule made keeping our writers sort of in tandem with each other basically impossibility. So we just kind of have to do our own thing. Like, they always tried to pay lip service. I remember after it was early in the show when Winter Soldier came out. And so, like, the episode begins with them saying, Coulson walking in going, look, I know we've all had a really rough week or whatever. And like referencing like, oh, remember that whole coup d'etat where helicarriers try to ruin everything about life on Earth? Like, that sucked, but it's a new day. Let's move on with our lives. Like, that was about the closest they were ever able to get to having interconnectivity, and that's something that's not player driven. Like that's just TV schedule versus film schedule
versus
you know?
game
It's
schedule. Like just the production cycles for these different formats are so vastly different.
And the production, like the process as well. That, again, I'm sorry, I keep bringing back to John Wick, but that is really relevant to this.
Yeah,
I've been
for sure.
through the process you're describing. Like the nature of iteration. Like, and these are like the people on the film side are super smart. They know their stuff, but having to explain to like them how iteration works, that like we make it and then we remake it and we tweak it and we fiddle with it and we change it, rather than that like this is the moment we set the script in stone, this is how we do this, and then lining that up with they were making the third movie while we were making the game, and like getting access to that script, going over, literally flying to LA to read the script and doing that process, and then going into the edit process with them, and like all of those overlaps. It's a lot of work. Like it's maintaining that kind of connectivity, and that because we were lucky in that we were deliberately making something that was like a prequel to a prequel.
Yeah.
So we knew narratively we didn't have to worry too much.
Did you have a
But I also
conversation
wanted, like,
about being more current, or was it just from the jump you didn't want to do it?
It was my pitch to them. I actually pitched it to them as the self-destructing universe. I was like, one of the biggest strengths of John Wick is that it's mythic and that there's ambiguity about all the stories, but also that your protagonist literally kills everyone they encounter. So you could literally, with John Wick, you could go and make this kind of, the John Wick Hex universe kind of self-destructs. It's a bunch of interesting characters.
Like a closed
because it's
circle.
John Wick. It's kind of a closed loop.
Yeah.
And that made things easier. But that was the main reason I pitched it to them as that way, was just because of exactly the problems you're describing, of just like, if we had made it the, a specific character, it's just, and this is, I'll step away from John Wick, but like, movies remove characters. There are characters who are like massively important in a film, and then when they get to the edit suite, they're like, oh, we need to just cut this character. That happens all the time, and we hear.
I have
about
actor friends who like I have a friend who was like the main bad guy in one of those like I think it was London Has Fallen, but that franchise with Gerard Butler of the like Secret Service superhero. I think it was London Has Fallen. I have an actor friend who was like basically the main bad guy, but he was sort of answering to his father, the uber bad guy behind the bad guy. And then in the edit, they recut the film so heavily that my friend basically is not in the movie anymore. And the father figure has kind of assumed the role in the edit as the main villain. And it's one of those, like,
now imagine if you were making the game, if you were making the game where your buddy was like an intrinsic part of the plot suddenly, because the filmmakers, they shouldn't have to compromise their vision to facilitate your video game. And likewise, like your video game's going to get messed over by those.
Right.
So it's a lot of trust and a lot of reliance. I think what gets easier is, as a franchise exists, certain things are never locked in, but there's enough like of a Bible that you can, like with Star Wars, like there are unmovable points and characters you can rely on being in a certain place at a certain time. So you can, in Star Wars, I think it's probably easier to do something like what EA did and kind of add a character who's in this kind of this niche.
Right.
Even with John Wick, there was only a couple of movies at that point. There was enough established lore and world building that we knew what we were. We knew the things that they weren't going to change in the next movie. But if you tried to build something like specifically from the ground up alongside a movie, that's really tricky. I think you'd probably be better off waiting until one of the things had matured. Like if you imagine like
well, I mean, the Last of Us TV show is sort of that, right? But then I have this thing where. And I don't know if...
But presumably they're just going to adapt the first
right, which
game,
I just don't get. Like, I don't know, maybe I should think about it more broadly. In my head, my reaction to that being announced, a lot of people are really excited. It feels so weird to have this conversation without Troy here, but if people are very excited, but I was just like, I have already played that game, and I love that game, and that game does such an incredible job of selling you those two characters and their relationship. Why do I want to watch something else that just does the same thing? I was like, if you're
maybe it's parallel. Is it like maybe it's other characters in that world?
That's what I would prefer.
I could imagine,
you
like,
could give me the same
the
universe.
Firefly's origin story or something.
It's still Joel and Ellie, but I'm not actually.
Really? Okay, that's interesting.
But
I think it is a straight adaptation. I mean, obviously Troy would know, but I that was my impression as well. That it is Joel and Ellie. It is The Last of Us, the game, the show.
Yeah.
Huh.
Which to me just seems like such an odd thing to do, but I guess.
Well, look at The Witcher on Netflix. Like,
but that's still from the books. Like
that's true. They're not adapting the game directly.
No, so that still feels very different. Not that people don't I don't know, most game adaptations seem to be just a mess, but with The Last of Us, like it's like maybe I need to think about it in regards to, well, this is an incredible story that I really love. What about people who don't play video games or don't want to play a game like that is pretty scary and pretty intense? They should still get to experience that story in theory. So I like kind of don't know where I land on that, but in terms
there's
of
potential for way more people to experience it. Apropos the point a minute ago, like it could be 10 times the audience size potentially.
Yeah. And I don't want people to miss out on that story because it's frankly really good. So I'm like happy for them to have more of it. But it's definitely a situation of, you know, if all we're doing when it comes to having a lot of video game properties be made into movies is just adaptations, I don't feel like that strengthens either medium. I do feel like there are examples like John Wick or like what it sounds like you described with The Matrix, Mike, where video games enhance films. Video games do that the other way around. Like I feel like John Wick existing or Hex existing in theory adds extra content to enhance that universe, but I don't feel like that happens.
That's very generous of you, and I would definitely not necessarily be. But we benefited. I think it was a bi-directional thing. We benefited from them, like in terms of like we had some rules about a world. We had some mechanics we could build on because of, you know, the audience knows how to play our game. Arguably, the movies are the tutorial for our game because you know how that world works. So we actually had that in playtesting. Again, deja vu. I feel like maybe I've said this on the show before, but like in playtesting, we genuinely saw that people who knew the movies were better at the game than people who didn't, which was interesting because that demonstrates that clearly the game was dependent on that awareness.
How, if you don't mind me asking, or if you're allowed to talk about it, how did that game come about from the pitch stages? I feel like we probably spoke about this on the panel, but I mean, like, if you can talk about
the secret lost first episode of Play What episode 0.
Basically, I have some very incriminating photos of several people at Lionsgate. No, it was a buddy.
Did they come to you, or did you go to them?
They came to me. To be clear, they came to me and I think probably a lot of other people and said like, what would you do with John Wick? And I pitched them on, because the obvious answer is the third person shooter, right? Like that's the clean, straightforward thing. But for me, the big problem with the third person shooter is you're clumsy as a player. Like I'm clumsy. When I play a third person shooter, I'm circle strafing. I don't play third person shooters the way John Wick fights in a movie. I didn't want to do that. So I pitched them the strategy game because I figured like that would give you the time to like figure it out. And basically just pitched them that, made a little prototype with, you know, classic kind of grey box, ugly thing, and flew to LA and demoed that and got, you know, and then it's the Hollywood thing, which is just constant pitching. So demonstrated it to the initial people, then to the other people, and just kept broadening out until you're in the room with the actual, like, with Chad, basically, the director, and Basil, the exec producer, like, playing, or not playing, looking at me play and kind of giving that. So yeah, it was very weird. They came to me though. What was nice, what I think it came from was it was a friendship basically. Is a guy called Ben Andak who's
it was collusion. Got it.
It was collusion. Yeah, it was behind closed doors collusion, nepotism. But someone who's a producer who I've gone on with. He produced No Man's Sky and he's produced a bunch of different cool stuff. And a couple of my games. So I think he was approached to kind of try and produce a John Wick game, and I think I was one of the people on his list of like, I wonder what that guy would do, and so I benefited from that as well. So definitely not just me being the best person; it was just a good opportunity.
That's how industries work, really. But to your point of like a third-person shooter potentially making you clumsy or do stupid stuff that John Wick would not necessarily do, I do think that's also a really interesting part of IPs. Like I don't even know if this is like public or not. Sometimes I forget like if things have just been told to me or like whatever, but I'm allowed to talk about it.
This is how we get IGN articles based on the podcast. Apparently. When we go down this road. That's the goal. Each episode we want one IGN article.
Arkham Knight had a rebrand towards the end of development of that game because the Arkham Knight character, spoiler if you haven't played it, really is just Red Hood, but they really didn't want players to know more than Batman because I think WB had an issue with the idea that Batman would be seen as stupid and the audience would all know that was Red Hood. It seemed very obvious to me anyway, like when if you know anything about Red Hood, you know what's happening in that through line. But I feel like that's an IP protection thing that video games do have to be considerate of, is like if you're playing a game where you have Batman, that detective has to be smarter than you. You cannot know something he doesn't know. If you have a game where you're playing John Wick has to be very calculated and very good at what he does, or he's not John Wick. And these two things that are supposed to line up, like Batman's probably the most successful multimedia franchise that I can think of, probably ever. It's on everything and successful at virtually all of them. Like, God, that animated
and since the 60s.
Yeah.
Like, that's the crazy thing,
and,
right?
and
like,
they
sustained success.
You do that by having this cohesiveness with characters that in any of those formats, sure, Batman gets really goofy and it's shock repellent and he went down the whole nipple journey. That's all happened, but you still know what Batman is. You know he's the world's greatest detective, and that still has to be true in Arkham Knight. And I always found that really interesting, like the idea that they just last minute had the realization that all the players are going to know what this is. The players can't know more than Batman, or the whole of Batman is ruined. And that's got to be, especially if we're talking about like movie video game crossovers, just such a complicated thing to retain IP that I feel like at some points, which it doesn't sound like it was really the case with John Wick, is just more complicated than people want to bother with.
Yeah, and that's a fair thing, right? There's lots of developers who don't do IP based stuff, and it's challenging on that level, but it's collaboration, right? And ultimately, I think as well, it depends on the collaboration. It depends on what the IP is. Like with John Wick, it was pretty loose in terms of like, they respected me to kind of trust what. But as far as I know, I never pitched them like a terrible idea. So I kind of we never had like an argument like that or a misunderstanding of like John Wick can't do that. I think that was partially because we were making good choices, but also I think they're a bit. They're earlier in the franchise building, so they were accepting of that stuff. Whereas I've worked on I remember years and years ago working on Nickelodeon stuff and SpongeBob. There's hundreds of pages of this is SpongeBob. This is how SpongeBob looks. This is this kind of situation. SpongeBob's views on things. How does SpongeBob solve a problem? And these are very specific. The Second Amendment. But seriously, in some cases, it goes that far. This is the political alignment of this cartoon character and shit.
No way.
But that's in a way, I think that's really good as well. It can be very limiting and constraining, but at the same time, as a game designer, that's interesting to know the rules. Rule sets are really important to games, and I think knowing where you stand is often actually really preferable.
It means that I
design, right?
Don't have that much choice. It's way easier.
Yeah, and I think that can be really empowering and really cool. And the other thing as well is you can kind of piggyback on the learnings. Something like SpongeBob. I remember one of the coolest, and this is so nerdy, but it genuinely is one of the coolest days I ever had at work. Was me and a guy called Daz Watford, who was a concept artist I was working with there and has since now does all the concept art at Bithell Games, and we've worked together for years now. But me and him were sat there kind of young baby us, and we'd been given some SpongeBob stuff to work on, and we'd gotten their design Bible, and we were looking through it, and we realized that on Nickelodeon there are 15 colors, full stop, 15 hues. There is a yellow, there is a Nickelodeon yellow. There's a Nickelodeon green. There's a Nickelodeon blue. They have that
a precisely defined.
That is the Nickelodeon blue, and the reason they do it is because they can put any Nickelodeon character on a billboard next to any other Nickelodeon character, and those colors are going to harmonize and sync up and look good. And I remember me and Daz just nerding out over this, we'd seen through the Matrix. We'd seen the yellow on SpongeBob is the exact same yellow that is the bow tie on this other character.
Wow.
You know what that probably also. You know what the secondary effect of that probably also is it's not just that you could see two different Nickelodeon characters on a billboard and they would harmonize, but if you saw a Nickelodeon billboard and a John Wick billboard or like a Pixar billboard, maybe a better comparison, you don't even have to actually look at it to if you've been around enough and had that kind of ambient exposure. I bet that you would intuitively
it's
pick out that it's Nickelodeon just in peripheral vision almost.
And that's what the franchises can do, is they can kind of teach you all of this stuff. Presumably Nickelodeon spent millions working that out. I know it's simple, seeming after you hear about it, you're like, I could come up with a palette of 15 colors. That's no problem. But I bet they spent a lot of money and time figuring that stuff out for the reasons you say, Austin. And likewise, with John Wick, they have the best martial artists in the world developing these fight styles and these approaches to stunt choreography. And I just get to walk in at the last stage of that and go, yeah, I'll have that. I like that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, there's this really interesting kind of building on the shoulders of giants aspect of all of this stuff. Same with Batman, right? Crucially with Batman, the Goofy was the original Batman, and then you have kind of the late 80s, you have kind of your Dark Knight kind of era where everything goes very grim dark, and then you have kind of things lighten up and darken up and shift and change. But everyone's building on what went before, and that's what's interesting. Dark Knight isn't as good if Adam West's silly Batman never existed.
That's true.
And likewise on and on. The Arkham games rely on you having seen the Batman movies, you know, and then you know, the Justice League movie presumes that you know Ben Affleck's backstory is every Batman story you've ever heard, right? And there's just some very interesting kind of franchises build, and there's a really interesting kind of different kind of storytelling and different kind of set of expectations you can work with. And to bring it right back to your point, that's also true of video games going the other way potentially. Like the Sonic movie, I arguably cared more about that character because I know Sonic, because I've played Sonic. Not the world's best movie, but like I connected with it in a way that I wouldn't have done with like generic children's animated movie number 26.
Sonic's been a part of your life for a really long time.
Yeah. And it carries over. It means something.
You know,
and they can do jokes which rely on those expectations. They can do story beats that rely on that relationship, you know? Something
that since you're bringing it back, I realized a thought occurred to me. I didn't want to interrupt earlier, and then it vanished. Mm-hmm. Was just that on that subject of the initial question of games potentially informing any other media, but particularly film, and to the extent that that's possible, to the extent that it makes sense, to the extent that it's even a good idea, a thought occurred to me was that all media, all art, all creative acts, all like literally you can balloon this to as big a category as you want. Everything is always on some level a reflection of the tools that are used to make it, right? Like if you and the medium in which you're working as a byproduct of that tool. Like if I have a fork and a knife and wax to make a sculpture with, I'm going to make a different sculpture fundamentally, even if I'm trying to make the same thing as if I have a blowtorch and like scrap metal, right? Like to do a different kind of sculpture with. And,
I like how violent both of those processes are going to be.
Well, yeah. Good. Exactly.
Sculpting
in that way, yeah, exactly. In that way, maybe it's just a reflection of me more than anything. But so point is like, and that's where you see video game tools like perfect, like apropos our conversation last week of the Unreal demo, where like the things that the Unreal Engine can do well is naturally going to yield games that lean into that feature set. And it's not that these games are imitating each other. And so I think that is where prior to today, a lot of the disconnect between film and game is just wildly different sets of tools. And even if you had the most diehard filmmaker gamer, like a Duncan Jones you mentioned, they're just using really different tools to make their film. That, I think, interestingly, might be on the cusp of changing, because the thought that occurred to me was I'm friends with this director, Wes Ball, who famously recently shared online his sort of pitch reel for the adaptation of the Mouse Guard that he was making that got scrapped by Disney as part of the Fox acquisition. He had previously directed all of the Maze Runner films, and then
seeing this, yeah.
So he did this previs in Unreal 4. Mm-hmm. And he learned how to do it himself. He comes from a visual effects background, so his films always, like, if you watch those Maze Runner movies, I mean, they're young adult sort of Hunger Games type things. But the thing that his work always for sure has across the board is this striking visual sense, especially beyond what the budget would seemingly have been able to achieve, because he's a very, very visually gifted guy. And when you watch this Mouse Guard previs in Unreal, the only difference between it and a video game was that his didn't have to be rendered in real time. So because the previs of this thing is amazing. You're like, this is not the actual movie. And he's like, oh, no. Look at that. You know, the hair particle there is no good. And that light bounces off the water weird. And he has all these very nitpicky issues with it, but because this is not the real thing. But I remember thinking, I wonder what the implications for filmmaking would be if they're using video game tools to make their film, because that's going to have the same effect as when video game companies are all using the same tools. They're going to start leaning into the things that it does really well. And all these discussions of level design and character animation, all the different ways that games have optimized the use of that or the creation of that for themselves, may just roll straight into film, and suddenly films are starting to feel very video gamey, and it's not really an aspiration. It's just literally the tools are so convenient and so fast and so iterative that they just start using them.
See, I think it was The Blacklist. TV show aired its finale, and because they had not finished shooting completely,
the graphic novel.
They had to have some animated bits, basically.
Really?
And
so cool.
It's very strange. This one isn't the one I'm referring to. It might not be The Blacklist. I might be wrong about the show, but it's very much like an animated. It looks like the Telltale engine. It's very weird. And the thought that like they basically looks like they put a video game cutscene into that show to air the final season. And I keep thinking, what are the older people who don't know what video games are, who are seeing this, going to think of this weird final season they've gotten? But in theory, Austin, you're right. Like, especially in a situation like COVID, having, I think, more accessibility or just a transfer of skills for someone who could use an engine, who could, if need be, fix something like that or add something into a film later using the techniques of Unreal, doesn't seem like that's that far off or that unlikely, especially because we had to use it right now. People are doing that right now.
I mean, Mandalorian does it all over the shop.
True.
Already, right? And that was, I think you're right, Austin. I think that's going to inform the visual language. Like Mandalorian, the specific stuff they use it for is the kind of mid-range, deserty environment, not much linking the foreground and background. They do use it. There's a bar scene they use it for, which is incredible. But like generally, they're using it in kind of a limited way, and that prepare for a lot of scenes where characters are relatively stationary in front of mid to far distance backgrounds and not having any back and forth interaction with those environments. I think that's
even
going to be
their backgrounds with their extras. I haven't watched the behind the scenes for Mandalorian. I really should. Were pre-recorded.
It's really good.
Right?
They've done like a standalone documentary called Gallery, which is all right actually. You'd like it. It's got a lot of the showrunner from Clone Wars that I've forgotten the name of. Filoni, that's the guy.
I mean, yeah, he does.
He's
he
amazing.
does Mandalorian too, and I think that's like a thing that I will always love about Star Wars is how much I've said this a million times before. It just pushed the medium forwards, and I love that it's continuing to do so with Mandalorian with this entirely new way of shooting that I guess is kind of video gamey. It is a background that exists on a wall that you've put a character into. And then
have you seen the Favreau stuff on? Have you seen the Disney, the new Lion King they did? Have you seen all the stuff about that? They made that basically in real time. So all of the Disney Lion King, the new Lion King, Favreau is so into this stuff.
He's brilliant also.
They shot it. So what they did was they essentially to use Austin's Mates thing as an example, they shot in I think it was in Unreal. They basically a scene of, I don't know, Simba walking across the screen, right? What they would do is they made a rough version of that animation, put it in engine, and then they like mocapped essentially cameras. So they had like cameramen who were like experienced either nature photographers or like filmmakers, actually like with these virtual cameras following this action in a VR environment. They would then record the camera and then that camera would then be used in the real thing. And once you've had that point out, it's so clever. Yeah. They did the Pride Rock shot. So in the opening of Lion King Circle of Life, where you have like that big high up camera shot of the Pride Rock with Rafiki holding up Simba, and that's me holding up Simba. In fact, I probably got the Lion King art book.
Of course you do. We've ticked our Star Wars box, but we need a mic
and our SpongeBob box. I think this is the second week in a row we've spoken about SpongeBob.
So they shot that. They put mocap on a drone, and they shot it as a miniature in a virtual miniature essentially. So they could simulate what a helicopter shot might look like in that environment.
That's so
cool. When you see it in the movie, it looks. So genuinely, like the Lion King, I think the new Lion King movies, got its imperfections, but the making of stuff is so fascinating and predates a lot, like prefigures. You can see how Jon Favreau did that, got some ideas, and then went and made Mandalorian, and then you can see kind of
I think what Mandalorian's done is just super exciting in general. The way that technology works is also like really helpful for a situation like COVID where people can't be around each other. because you can have a really limited amount of people actually physically on that stage at any given time, because the background can all be edited or pieced together, like copy pasted humans together, basically, which is a very weird landscape. And I've seen conversations about what that means for people who make their money as full-time extras, because in theory they would not have as many days on set because they don't need to be there when the main actors are recording. So there's a bunch of like issues there with the more digital things are getting. But it's crazy cool stuff. And like I always found it fascinating, Detroit Become Human, or I think most of Quantic's games do it, but they specifically hired a DP who had only ever worked in film for Detroit Become Human to make sure that shots have a certain amount of grain or a certain tone. Or for Clara, I think her name is, she's very much like aggressively framed as being small, and you often see sort of, I don't know how to describe, literally just frames around her so that she seems very oppressed in the environments, which is all techniques that have come from film directly, because you're making a game that is very much cinematic and focused on being like film. And I guess that was really my leading question that I wanted to ask you guys about today was, when do we see films that, and we have raised a few examples, that become like games? Because I, for whatever reason, want that. Like, I feel like I like.
When you say like games, do you mean like interactive? Is that like
no,
is that
because
the magic
that's
bit?
that's
or?
like Bandersnatch and what's
Sure.
I think you might have worked on it, Austin. What's the
Erica.
Yes, Erica works
indeed.
that way, right? That's live action.
It is, but I've had to repeat this line a million times. Whereas Bandersnatch is very much an interactive film, basically. Erica is a filmed game. Erica is very gamey. It is not token interaction slapped onto something that was produced like a film. It was conceived of as a game from day one.
Okay.
Just to make
And
the
that bears
distinction
out
clear.
when you play.
So
it.
if
It reminds me of the X-Files FMV game from years ago, which
I
if
did not
anyone
even
can
know
find
that existed. I
Oh,
thought I
it's
knew.
so
I
good.
thought I knew the FMV well pretty deeply.
But that was very much like what you're describing, in that was a point-and-click adventure game that happened to also use video footage. Like it felt very gamey in a way that you're absolutely right. The Netflix stuff doesn't quite have that same vibe.
so
And again, relating to tools, partly because it's dependent on what the Netflix. Like I remember actually.
Sure.
I hope this isn't overly confidential information, but I remember Jack Attridge saying that they had conversations, or they explored, or maybe even just contemplated the notion of collaborating with Netflix, because Bandersnatch came out right when we were just about finished with Erica.
Yeah.
And no one knew it was coming. And I remember he went and looked at it, and he was like, their tech couldn't possibly support what we need it to. Like
Not all of your interactions and stuff.
No, I mean, it's just, like we're taking advantage of even a mobile game is tricky because the file size to download all this high-res footage, just that problem alone is, and to stream it would be essentially next to impossible, because there's interactions every few seconds that just cut immediately based on what you are choosing.
That's why Sam always makes his games about webcams.
I know,
So he can
exactly.
do a lower resolution. He's super smart.
Well,
He's
he
very
also,
smart.
he says explicitly his goal is to not be cinematic. That's like explicitly part of the agenda. It's part of what makes them genius. I fucking love his games so much.
So good.
And Sam, for our
Sorry, we're being
slightly
dicks, aren't we?
slightly obtuse Sam Barlow
Sam
and
Barlow.
telling lies and her story.
I
both
mean,
of which
those
I
are
just
also
thought.
really good examples of film games. They blur a line between which of those two things that they are. And I mean, I haven't played Eric. I really feel like I should. I'm so interested in that concept, especially if you say there's interactions every few seconds. I didn't expect that. Like that's really cool. I should definitely give it a try. I imagine the score's pretty good. So
Well, I don't know if the score is good, but Mike's probably
You know
right.
what would make it better?
Literally any other composer. If it had been the Hotline Miami soundtrack.
Hotline Miami guy. That would have.
But that wasn't a
that would
guy.
have really
That's the
set
worst
it off.
part. So many of those songs just existed beforehand.
Yeah.
Put it
Jack
there.
really should have
That's
just
it.
licensed Hotline Miami music for Erica. I'm gonna go ahead and let him know, like for
It's
future
a
porting or
soundtrack.
something.
It's just a soundtrack you want to listen to again and again. The Hotline Miami
It
soundtrack.
is. I'm gonna go listen to it right now. So
Yeah,
whatever.
it's-
Well, then
Turn
we've
it
done
up
our
to full.
purpose.
Austin, you're very good at what you do. Just in case you didn't know and nobody's told you recently, you're very good at
I
what
don't-
you do.
You're very good at what you do.
Is this like the parking validation taken to its extreme here?
No, it's
as
just genuine.
As I head out the door. No,
genuine.
That's very kind of you. I would not presume to compete with Hotline Miami, though. You can have that. It's okay. I will say, I don't know if I can endorse the quality of Erica, but I will say it was the most technically challenging score I've ever written, far and away, because of how extremely interactive it had to be, because of the fact that you make meaningful choices constantly, like, and because it's a film, the level of nuance that you pick up as a player is so much greater than even the highest level mocap currently offers, because it's like you say one line and a character's eyebrow shifts in response, and it's like, if I ignore that musically, I'm actually ignoring the storytelling, because that eyebrow raise was the storytelling. And aside from obviously very carefully created cinematics in a game of the level of fidelity of like The Last of Us, you just don't have that. Like in a dialogue scene, you take a Mass Effect game, there'll be, or Dragon Age or something, there's a shit ton of dialogue, but you don't have that line, reaction, pause, reaction, like all that goes into crafting a dialogue scene of a film, because there's just 10 times more or 100 times more content. You don't get that extreme level. You might get the actors trying to bring that from a voice performance, but all the other elements and the visual nature of it is largely glossed over.
Really kind of only LA Noire that really has ever done that extensively, where you do have to pay attention to the nuance of every single facial expression, and it's like,
but it's like, that's a game mechanic. Yeah, but that was also like, are they lying? Can you catch the criminal? And and I found that was exactly, I failed every time, because I was like, I think they're having a stroke. I don't even know what's going on.
I always overanalyze it. Oh, she's definitely lying. That face was weird as hell. I'm like, no, she wasn't.
I was like that she wants me to think she's happy, but actually it's like, no.
Yeah, it didn't translate to human. So then for Eric Austin, like, what did you do? Did you just
the music is
make
insanely
a
granular.
lot of music?
It's actually the music. Well, so little plug for my YouTube channel. I actually have a video on my YouTube channel that's a 10 or 11 minute video called Anatomy of a Scene, and it's a single 2-minute scene where I did a capture playing through the scene, and I narrate over top of it, and we have a visual map going by showing you the way the score is in constant motion, where it's like, okay, if I click on this, it's going to bring in a violin, but then immediately this character comes in, so I have to bring in a cello doing this, so I walk through, and then it rewinds after a few minutes and says, now what if I had done this one thing differently? And it plays through the scene, and it shows that entirely different content, musically and visually and gameplay in every sense, shows up as a result. And so it took like a month to make this one video just to kind of analyze how insane we had to get, because at the start, I didn't think it had to be that complicated, but then Jack would say, well, wait a minute, but the character just brought up this, and that's kind of a hint to this thing later where we bring up the mother and all that. And I realized, yeah, you're right. That's a pretty important piece of foreshadow. I can't ignore that. But the player might not choose that line of dialogue. So we have to have this optional ability to pivot into a bit of very narrative sense. And it's like every few seconds there was a discussion like that. So it's a normal amount of score in terms of like how much I'm normally tasked to do. It's around maybe 80 minutes of music and just shy of an hour and a half, which is not that much. I mean, most games tend to round out around an hour unless they're inordinately large games. But like, that's just kind of a number that seems to be reasonably typical to the extent that it's remotely possible to generalize. This one, the key is that it's like an hour consisted of 1 million tiny Lego blocks.
Interesting.
That all have to figure out these different combinations for reassembly in a constant moving target sort of way.
It's so cool because
the heartbreaking aspect is how invisible a lot of that.
That's what I was going to say, is like the amount of stuff like that goes into making a video game, like, you making that part of that game that nobody has any idea about, and how complicated that can be. By
design.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it should feel like while they're playing, and this is true of Journey or even Assassin's Creed or anything else, my goal is to feel like they are playing, but if they could somehow just kind of close their eyes and keep playing, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between I'm watching a movie and I'm playing a game, meaning you don't pick up on the game reacting to the mechanics. It just feels like I know what you're going to do, and I want to give you your emotional support of your experience. I want the music to know, I walked through the door and the music swelled right when I did, but it's as if it was locked in time and always meant to be that way. My little way of describing it is a Twitch streamer two different Twitch streamers, if you were to just watch them as a film, like the gameplay of a stream as a film, it should feel as tightly scored as if it was a film, but yet the two different streamers would have two different film scores. That's sort of my goal with every project.
That's so cool.
Different games lend itself to that different ways. Obviously, like a John Wick Hex has a very different set of systems driving it, and so it's going to succeed or not along different sort of parameters, I guess.
Yeah.
Just so many things about video games that are so catered to making sure players have good experiences that we just don't even notice in the way that, like, with, there's a conversation about film that we notice all of it, but like, in games, people have control of a 360-degree camera. If you need to tell a story where you need to have them look at a specific thing, there is the decision of, do you have to take away the control of the camera at that point, or do you have to somehow have, use of lines to direct people's eyesight in a certain way? Right. Like, a lot of it's kind of manipulation, but in a lot of ways to make sure that experience is the best for that player. And then
totally,
or you just turn them loose. I mean, we talk about that all the time, right? The ludonarrative dissonance, like dialogue scenes in Half-Life 2, where you can just wander around and be jumping up and down and banging your crowbar against the wall while they're having like intimate dialogue, and they just ignore you. And just this past week, I played through finally A Plague's Tale, which I really liked. Actually,
I was really play that.
Strong choice of game right now. Also.
Wasn't it? Yeah. Actually, it was interview prep because I was interviewing the composer on the Game Maker Notebook podcast, and I had never played a game he scored. He's the only composer I think I could possibly name that's true for among my friends and colleagues, where I somehow literally have never played a game of his. And I thought, well, that's just wrong. Especially because I think his music is fantastic. And so I played through little bits of 4 or 5 different games of his, but that one, after the interview, I was like, I actually feel that I have to go finish that game. I really was liking it.
How long is it? I think I might play it like next week. I've been thinking about it for so long.
9 hours, I think, was
Great.
What Steam
Love it.
reported.
Love to hear it.
I would love to get your take on it, because there are things that I love about it, and then there were things that I was very mixed. Did you play it, Mike?
I've not yet. No, again, one that's on the backlog, but right now, don't need those vibes in my life.
As a side note,
I will get to it, though. I will get to it.
The voice acting in it, it's one of those games that hinges on the dynamic between two characters, where it's a sister and a brother, and the little boy, the voice acting of the little boy was so good that I was like, God, I care about this kid. And it's so much on the back of, like, they just do such a good job of, you're in this horrendous environment of this plague just ravishing everything and these terrifying rats everywhere. And then the little boy will come across like a dead cow and be like, is he sleeping? And just says the most innocent thing in the most sort of dark moment. And it's just so fucking effective. But the reason I bring it up is because there are a few moments where they had a choice of, do we go the Half-Life route, or do we just like lock the camera in? Because there's a few moments where they have cutscenes, but then there's others where there will be an extended dialogue exchange not in a cutscene. And they actually let your character move within a very narrow band of space, but you cannot walk away from the scene entirely. Because normally I'm all about the immersion, but in this one instance, I just felt like exploring the room during the dialogue scene, and it wouldn't let me. And I thought, interesting choice. Like, you're restricting the player's agency because in this moment the story matters more. And it's like, yeah, I don't know if that's for better or worse.
It's a hard decision to make, I think.
Oh yeah. That's what games are, is essentially like a million tough to say. It's why every game developer, like, the most insulting thing you can say to a game developer is that they're lazy.
Yeah.
Because you spend your whole life making loads of decisions that no one will ever care about. Or that will be so hidden away, because if you do them right, if you make the right decision, it's so invisible. Yeah.
A lot of respect for video games.
Before we end, I wanted to ask you, because you hit on something earlier that I genuinely hadn't ever thought of in quite those terms, and I want to put both of you, a question to both of you. And Troy just doesn't get to answer this question.
Off the dock.
Yeah.
I miss Troy. I miss Troy.
Oh, not me. To hell with him. I miss his hair though. But
his hair was good, right? His hair was good.
Yeah.
I would say it's underappreciated, but that's just a lie. We know it's very adequately appreciated.
Yeah, it's appreciated.
You brought up, when you were talking about Arkham and needing to not be smarter than Batman, that actually was a pretty revelatory, because I realized that really is a massive differentiation between film and games that I'd never thought of quite so directly. Because I thought immediately of Hitchcock. So much of Hitchcock's tension design is about you as an audience member being ahead of the character. He loved creating scenes. Like there's one of my favorites is from his TV show, from Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I think that's what it was called, where there was a scene of, imagine a hallway where you can both see me, where the camera, you are the camera, and there's a hallway, like a lobby of a bank, and imagine, they have like a cubicle wall or actually just a full-on wall that stops in the lobby in the center of the frame. So there's this wall that you can see on edge that moves away from the camera. And on one side is a janitor who's mopping a floor. And on the other side is a guy who's going desk by desk, stealing or trying to break into a safe or something. And they both of these kind of hallways spill into a central lobby, and they're very gradually over the course of like a 5-minute shot making their way towards your POV as a viewer and in towards each other, unbeknownst to each other. And it's just a single static shot for like 5 minutes where you sit there completely on edge, and such typical Hitchcock brilliance, where their unawareness of each other is precisely why the scene is amazing. And what you're saying is that, especially in this archetypal hero kind of way, if the player is ahead of their own character, they immediately will shut out, or they'll think, oh, this is so stupid. Like, just it's right in front of you, you idiot. I know it. You should know it. And it's like the kind of cognitive dissonance. I'd never thought about that.
It's disengaging, I think. If horror films, a lot of the tension often comes from you having seen something, but in a horror game, you have to be experiencing exactly what the character is experiencing at the same time.
Right.
Like that's.
So then my question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead.
Well, my question then is to you guys: can you imagine a game in which that Hitchcock idea would work, where your character, but your player character, you are ahead of them, and that is the excitement? Is that a thought experiment that yields something to you? Because I can't think of. You made me realize I can't think of a game where if I'm supposed to be Batman, I can be in that moment like a quote better Batman than my player Batman, and it doesn't yield anything other than a disappointing game. But is that in your mind? Could you imagine that?
Look, now that you've like floated the idea, I want to see what that looks like and how to make it work.
Right.
But I don't know that it exists really at all. Like,
no, it's tricky. It's also tricky to do the opposite, the hyper competent character, because we've like when we did Subsurface Circular, we wanted to do a detective game. It's really hard to do detective fiction because Sherlock Holmes is so much cleverer than you that the fun of a Sherlock Holmes story is you catching up with him, right? Him revealing things
kind of the opposite.
Oh, how did I miss that?
Yeah,
exactly. So from that side, it's also really challenging. No, I don't. It's a tough one. I don't know. I can't think of an example except I guess you could make an argument that like strategy games or like stealth games, like you can see round corners of the player, but even that's like Solid Snake has awareness. Like you're simulating something that he already knows. It's not, you don't feel when Joel does his vision mode where he can see through walls, you think Joel also knows that information. So it's not the same thing at all.
Right.
So yeah, I can't think of an example of that. It'd be really hard to do it without it being incredibly frustrating to the player because that sweet frustration of a Hitchcock thriller, that's the pleasure, right? Like Rope is amazing.
Yeah.
You must have seen Rope if you're a Hitchcock fan. Like the way that plays.
I actually don't know that I have.
Oh, go see Rope. It's one shot. Well, it's not one shot because at the time film, I think a film cancel was like 20 minutes or so. So it's a one shot.
Probably less
movie.
than that actually, because modern.
They have to keep zooming into objects and then pulling out, but it's basically a one movie.
Yeah, right.
And it's a similar setup in a Hitchcock way of like, there's a box in the middle of the room and you know what's in the box, but none of the characters do. Or two of the characters do, but the others don't. And,
right.
It's Rope. If you haven't, it's really good. But I don't know how you do that again without it being, either frustrating or you having to be in the Hitchcock role, right? Yeah. If it was you knowing more than the player, the character and fucking
making a mechanic out of that sounds very exciting to me, but I don't know what it is.
But that's different. Yeah,
I guess
don't know what that is.
I guess if it was a game, like you remember Lemmings, like that's one where the character, it's not, but that's the thing. You are not the Lemmings. You're like God.
No,
basically.
You're God, right? Yeah.
And that's where it's different. That's like, cause you creating a path for a character to autopilot through, that's kind of the closest thing to being Hitchcock or being the director or the audience. But that's very different because you're not projecting yourself onto the character at that point.
I wonder if you could do it. In a weird way with like an empathetic third party character. So if imagine like a game where you're looking through like a security camera. I feel like this might have been done. I feel like there was a PS2 game that had a moment like this, and someone in the comments will name it. Imagine a game where you're looking through like a CCTV camera and you can see a character in the room and something bad's coming for that character. Your janitor's about to come and catch them.
They did that in the recent Call of Duty Modern Warfare, actually. There's a whole level of...
where you can give like directions.
There's a girl trying to escape the embassy and you're looking at her through the security camera and saying...
So that's kind of it, right?
Watch Dogs did some fantastic stuff with security cameras and like infiltrating buildings just by hacking the cameras. Like there's some cool stuff with that.
So, but the Call of Duty example, you're right, that's why I'm ripping off. But I think there's also other games. But yeah, that's kind of what you're talking about,
recent.
Right?
That's like the new Modern Warfare. I mean, the one that just came out.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. No, I know the one you mean. I've totally ripped that off with my idea. It's not an original brilliant idea, but like that sort of achieves what you're talking about, right? Because you know more than the protagonist in the scene.
The difference is that
they're in danger.
The difference is that your character is the person looking at the camera and talking to the girl to give her feedback.
You still know the same amount that your protagonist actually knows.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know that that's a parallel.
I'm not sure that can be.
It's a really interesting question.
It may not even be possible. Like, how can I feel like I'm the character on the camera?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that it's
you'd always
too
feel
much
like
of a
you're
leap
someone helping
potentially.
Someone else. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I think it comes down to the core of like what is satisfying about video games, which is that level of engagement or what keeps you playing often is a sense of discovery alongside the protagonist because you're effectively the same person. Like I don't know that it would that very intrinsically horror film especially, I feel like, or thriller film feeling is possible to have in a video game. I don't know.
You could be pretentious and say that the old Resident Evils do it. If you wanted to, I'm talking like super pretension here. Like you could go and because of the weird camera angles and because of the tank controls, like that you're removed enough that like you can't quite do the thing you need to do.
That does add suspense for sure in the fact that it's
like it's bad.
Yeah.
But I wonder if that makes it.
It's an interesting
pretentious.
One.
It's a pretentious.
It was a great
argument.
question. I liked it. It's an interesting thought.
It's kind of like a 2 a.m. idea.
So we've ticked our boxes. We've got SpongeBob, Star Wars, Mike's library, and then a pretentious Mike literati moment. So.
That's right.
That's normally coming from Troy, actually. So you're kind of you're guesting as Troy.
Well then,
done the whole set.
That's I think we done did it. Thank you for joining me today, both of you. We'll have Troy back next week. Hopefully. Mike is frozen for me. Is he frozen for you, Austin?
Can you hear me still?
Yeah, it's a beautiful smile you're frozen on.
I know, I was going to say, it's
like,
not
that's
a
actually
freeze.
a wonderful screenshot of
It's just a headshot.
Take that screenshot. I think my computer's actually crashed.
Excellent
timing.
I'm
in the moment. My screen is actually frozen as well, and none of my apps are working. So
you're basically...
you're back.
There you are.
Oh, I'm back. I'm back. It just came back.
Well...
And you two just played in fast forward for me, I assume, the last 2 minutes. It's amazing.
Excellent.
It couldn't have been a better freeze frame.
No,
though,
I never look like that in a freeze frame. Seriously.
Exactly.
Just look like you were very happy to be talking to us. So thank you. I'll take it.
Cool.
That's it from us this week. Yeah, hopefully Troy will be back next week. That is certainly the plan going forward. But as mentioned, we may eventually have guests if people's schedules are too busy or they're traveling. So if anyone has any requests for guests who would, in theory, have similar roles to us, whether it be directors, composers, actors, or journalists, for sure let me know. Would also love to know. I don't usually do the let us know in the comments below thing. But I would also love to know if anyone does have a game they can think of that is what Austin was asking us about. If that,
I feel like you've just invited the comments to be a flood of, here are the journalists I like better than Alanah, the game developers I like better than Mike, the composers I like better than Austin. Troy will probably be safe. But,
Troy can stay.
Yeah.
Just more of his head.
I'm going to be...
I think there'll be a vote for just 4 windows with 4 different Troys simultaneously.
I'd still listen to it. That's the thing.
We could
I
probably...
would watch that show.
Just a
I would
beautiful
watch that
voice.
show.
He'd have great
love a
conversations.
Beautiful voice. Beautiful voice.
Yeah, a show of... Let's make like a supercut of Joel talking to Booker, talking to, let's create an interesting... What's the bad guy from Far Cry? I always forget his name.
Pagan Min.
Pink suit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Big pink suit
yeah.
boy. Yeah. No, I'd watch that. I love how After Dark is really just us complimenting Troy, not to his face.
It's true.
And you
Incredible,
know he
man.
watches it.
We're just
You know he
laying on the
watches
love.
it. That's right.
That's how you treat people you love. Is you never tell them nice things while they're here. When they're not.
Of course.
Yeah.
We just weep. We miss you, Troy.
All right. We will see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.